You wake up in a room smaller than your kitchen, but you're not alone. Your children, your parents, and even the neighbors' pigs are packed in with you, breathing the same stale air, sharing the same dirt floor. There are no walls, no privacy, no silence, and yet somehow, within this overcrowded chaos, love still found a way. How did medieval couples find intimacy when the entire village was always watching? The year is 1347. Across the damp fields of England, the Holy Roman Empire, and the frost-bitten villages of Scandinavia, life is bound by toil, faith, and survival. In nearly every region of medieval Europe, from the rolling green shires of East Anglia to the snow-heavy forests of Bohemia, peasants lived in structures that were barely more than timber-framed boxese homes, made not for comfort, but for endurance. Most families owned only a single room. That room served every purpose: kitchen, nursery, barn, bedroom, birthing chamber, and grave. And it was not unusual for livestock to sleep inside, cows and pigs kept in for warmth, their breath mingling with that of the children on the floor. The average medieval peasant's house was just 12 feet wide. That's about the size of a modern garden shed. Entire families, sometimes 3 generations, lived and slept there together. And one disturbing truth: many children were conceived just a few feet away from their siblings, in total darkness, with nothing but hay and the creak of the roof beams for cover. A grey mist clings to the thatched roofs as the sun rises. The world is wet, cold, and cruelly quiet save for the bleating of a tethered goat and the cough of a child who hasn't known clean air since birth. Inside the peasant home, the scent is overwhelming. The floor is earth-packed dirt, soaked by years of spilled broth, pig urine, and infant waste. Above, a low roof of wooden rafters traps smoke from the hearth, thickening the air with soot and the ghost of last night's supper. Barley, gruel, maybe a scrap of salted pork, if luck permitted. The family stirs under woolen rags and flattened straw mattresses. There are no beds, just piles of old blankets, fleas, and aching limbs pressed together like roots twisted underground. A man rises, let's call him Alric. He's 34, though his hunched back and toothless gums would say otherwise. His wife, Elswith, barely opens her eyes. The baby on her chest whimpers, and 2 older children shift on either side of her, groaning. They've all slept in the same space. They always do. No doors separate generations. No barriers divide man from beast. A pig squeals nearby, restless in its penna-rough wooden enclosure just across from where the family sleeps. The mornings are raw. Ulrich's first task is to clear the chamber pot. He doesn't flinch at the stench. He pours the waste just outside the door, where flies already gather near the compost heap. Elswith, holding her child, walks barefoot to the hearth. The coals are almost out. She blows, she prays. Fire is life. There is no privacy here to change her bloodied linen after the monthly curse. She must crouch in a corner while her mother-in-law looks away out of courtesy. To nurse the baby, she does so with her back turned to her eldest son, who pretends to sleep, though he watches everything. These homes, barely 120 square feet, were crucibles of closeness where secrets couldn't exist, and silence was a luxury only the dead possessed. During the day, the house empties. Children fetch water. Women tend gardens, spin wool, or mend thatch. Men swing axes and push plows. But at night, they return, and the room shrinks again. Cold pushes bodies together for 5, sometimes 8 people, huddled on the same straw mat, breathing each other's breath, scratching lice from each other's scalps, enduring the same gnawing hunger. The architecture of these homes was not built for intimacy. It was built for survival. Windows were rare tiny slits filled with oiled cloth, barely letting in light, never enough to see without the hearth. There was no place for secrets, no time for passion, and no space for lovers. And yet, in the creaking dark, surrounded by coughing children and dying embers, people still reached for each other, because even in squalor, even in shared beds and half-whispered prayers, desire refused to die. But how did they make space for touch, for passion, for love? The answer lies not in the open firelight but in the shadows it cast. Night falls early in the medieval village, and with it comes a silence, so profound it hums. There are no street lamps, no candlelit windows to guide the way, just the wind through the timbers, the slow cracking of wood as the earth cools, and the faint murmur of prayers whispered into straw pillows. But not all sounds are holy. Sometimes a muffled breath, a shifting of blankets, a hand slipping under. Wool. You see, in a one-room house, love was never private. It was negotiated, hidden, sometimes stolen. Let us imagine a woman named Jezebel. She is 28 and weary. Her husband, John, works dawn to dusk in the Lord's field, but when he returns, he seeks not only warmth, but closeness. Therefore children lie bundled in a row at their feet. John places his hand on Jezebel's hip, beneath the blanket, careful to make no sound. The children stir. One coughs. The youngest begins to cry. The moment is lost. This was the common tragedy of the medieval bed. Intimacy was not forbidden, but it was almost impossible. And so couples developed a secret language of touch, of glances, of coded gestures done in the light of the hearth, when no one seemed to be looking. But sometimes desire outran discretion. There were recorded cases in the margins of manorial court rolls of couples, caught in acts of passion while children pretended to sleep. Neighbors might overhear and whisper. Shame spread quickly. Even married love had limits. Even within wedlock there were rules. Not on holy days, not during Lent, not while pregnant, not within the church's invisible web of restrictions. To violate these norms was to sin, and sin, in the eyes of the church, led to famine, disease, and hellfire. And yet, temptation burned through straw walls. Consider the monk's confession from Lincolnshire. In 1373, a peasant woman did cry out in the night. She confessed her husband's sin upon her belly, while their babes did breathe nearby. The priest did scold, but she wept not. She said, "Better this than none at all." Not all transgressions were consensual. In homes with no walls, where daughters became women before their 12th year, not all touches were loving. The horror of incest, though rarely spoken, lurked. In every cramped corner, the church preached chastity and purity. But their sermons could not separate flesh from flesh. When families slept together every night of their lives, a drunken uncle, a desperate cousin, a widower left to care for his adolescent daughter alone. Court records are sparse, redacted, or destroyed, but folklore songs, riddles, whispered warnings hinted at the unspoken. The girl who fled in the night, the man who was found hanging behind the stables. Sin was real, and sometimes it wore a familiar face. Then there were the unwed lovers, a stable boy, a shepherd's daughter. One summer night, a stolen kiss behind the granary, a promise, a touch, a bloom. of warmth in a cold world. But if the girl swelled with child, shame followed like a shadow. Some were forced to marry, others were cast out. A few disappeared entirely. Midwives whispered of herbs that could correct mistakes, tansy, penarial, mugwort. But the cost was high and not always paid in coin, and always. There were watchers, mothers pretending to sleep, brothers pretending to pray, even the pigs watching from the corner. Intimacy was never truly private, and that secrecy carved itself into the hearts of men and women alike. But they endured, they adapted, and in the strangest, most ingenious ways, they found room for love. The medieval mind was ruled by order divine, social and practical, but love does not bend easily to rules. So couples did not beg for space, they made it. In a world of smoke-darkened rafters and dirt floors, intimacy became a kind of artcraft of silence, patience, and ritual by day. The home was alive with labor. Children played, soup boiled, spinning wheels turned. But at night, cleverness replaced comfort. One of the most whispered customs across peasant villages was known quietly as bundling, a practice that came from necessity. The unmarried, and even some wed couples without privacy, would lie together in bed fully clothed, often sewn into their garments for modesty, and speak beneath blankets for hours, sometimes with a wooden board or linen sheet placed between them. The idea was simple, connection without consummation, but the practice was rarely so clean. As Father Harwin once wrote in the parish ledger of 1391, better a couple who sinned, wrapped in wool, than one who burned in silence and took to madness. There were rituals. To dot in the Low Countries, some peasant homes kept a love cloth, a heavy woolen drape that hung from the ceiling, not to divide the room, but to drape over the lovers, a symbolic veil of privacy when none truly existed. It muffled sound, it blocked view, it became a sacred space, small as a cradle, warm as a fire. In other regions, the hearth itself became the space of intimacy after the children were asleep and the embers had cooled. Lovers would lie close to the fire's last warmth, pressed against its stones. The red glow gave just enough light to see a face, to trace a jaw, to remember why they still reached for each other, and for those who could not risk touch at home. The forest called. There are records in Kent from 1317 of a local alderman scolding young couples for retreating to the moon grove after sunset. It was said that among the roots of the oldest oak, 10 paces beyond the pasture fence, many sins were committed, though the local midwife claimed more children came from the grove than from the marriage bed. But not every workaround was romantic. Some were built from raw survival. In homes where in-laws shared the same walls, one couple might bribe a cousin to take the children out, foraging a little longer than needed. A pair of chickens, a small wedge of cheese, the price of an hour alone. Other families simply planned their intimacy around exhaustion. Wait until the others are too tired to notice, until the baby is too deeply asleep, until the grandmother's cough falls silent. They moved slowly, spoke nothing, and held each other under blankets heavy with sweat and hay dust. And then there was the bath ritual, luxury only the most fortunate. Peasants might afford a wooden tub filled once a month, heated by the hearth, shared by the entire family. But occasionally, when children were sent to the fields early and the steam clung like fog on the rafters, the couple lingered. They washed each other in silence. Their fingers moved slowly between scars, across calluses, No words, just water and memory, because even in the darkest corners of medieval life, the human need for connection found a way, sometimes in defiance, sometimes in cleverness, always in secret. But even secrets have consequences, and not all were blessed in the medieval world. There was no such thing as personal space, not for women, not for men, not even for children. The very architecture of the peasant home made that clear. A single room, one fire, no walls, no locks, no boundaries, and in a space where every breath was shared, so too were every secret and every wound, because the intimacy that found its way into these suffocating spaces often left behind something else, something darker. You see, the tragedy wasn't just in the hardship, it was in what that hardship did to the soul. Take a woman named Anwin in Devon, 1354. She lived with her husband, 3 children, and his aging father. She was 25. Her body bore the marks of childbirth and cold winters. One night, in the middle of Lentwin, marital intimacy was forbidden by the church. Her husband demanded his rights. She whispered no. He did not listen. She wept silently beneath the blanket while her father-in-law stared at the ceiling, unmoving. Next day, she brought extra wood for the fire. The day after that, she kissed her baby and said nothing more. She died by the river the following week. The parish priest called it fever, but her neighbor knew better, because love without freedom is not love at all. It is obligation. It is weight. It is a prison lined with straw and soot. And these were the unintended consequences. Children raised in one room. Homes did not just inherit poverty, they inherited silence. A silence that taught them not to ask, not to question, not to feel. A silence that buried trauma beneath tradition and the church. It offered little more than rituals. Holy days forbade intimacy. Confession punished desire. Priests preached that women who enjoyed their husbands too much risked sin. That pleasure must always be moderated, controlled, restrained. So even the joy that could have existed, brief as it was, became a source of guilt. What does that do to a person? What does it mean to long for someone? In a place where longing has no room. There are stories fragmented, buried in old confessions and forgotten letters of lovers who stopped speaking, of marriages that turned to dust, of wives who vanished into convents, of men who walked into the forest one day and never came back, not because they hated their life, but because they could no longer find themselves in it. And perhaps the cruelest truth of all is this, that even when two people loved each other deeply, truly, the world around them refused to give them the space to show it. They would lie together in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by snoring children and the rustling of mice in the strand they would not touch, not because they didn't want to, but because there was nowhere to go, no door to close, no silence to protect them, no moment that belonged to them alone. And in that absence, something sacred was lost, not just desire, but dignity. You wake up before the sun, the fire is out, the room is cold, and beside you lies a body you love but cannot reach. Around you, children shift in sleep. A pig grunts. Somewhere, wind whispers through the thatch. You do not speak. You do not move, because you know this world was not made for softness, not for privacy, not for passion. It was made for survival. And yet, within the smoke and straw, people still searched for more. They found it in glances across the hearth, in fingers laced beneath a blanket, in whispered promises under moonlight. or a single breath shared behind the barn. It wasn't always enough, but sometimes it was. Sometimes a moment of touch, fragile, stolen, barely real, was worth the shame, the risk, the silence. Because even in homes that never allowed solitude, hearts still beat. They beat for warmth, for comfort, for love. So how did couples find intimacy in overcrowded one-room homes? They didn't. They carved it, stole it, invented it. And when they failed, they endured. Because in the end, love in the Middle Ages was not about roses or romance. It was about resilience, the kind that survives under mud and ashdod, the kind that does not ask for space, but grows in the cracks of suffering. And yet, despite everything, they endured.